Kia ora and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm Kathy O'Sullivan, editor for CIO New Zealand. My guest today is Karl Wright, CIO and Chief Information Security Officer at Datacom. Hello, Karl. Welcome along.
Yeah, hi. How are you, Kathy?
Good. Great to have you here today. So just to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit more about your role and what your team at Datacom does?
Yep. So as many people will know, Datacom is a managed service provider. We're probably most well known for being a managed service provider, but of course there's a bunch of other things we do that are in the application development space, the transformation engineering space, as well as payroll. Probably not very well known is that we pay well over something like 200,000 Kiwis every week or every 2 weeks. And my role in that context is I have two roles. I'm the CIO for Datacom, so I look after the internal group technology, and then of course I'm also the CISO for the group, and my role there is really around ensuring the safety and security of all things Datacom, which of course includes our customers. So there's a very large element of customer facing in my role too there.
Great. And you mentioned transformation, and transformation is often talked about as if it's a given, but in reality, it's not easy. So how has that approach taken shape in your own career?
I'd say I'd start by saying that nothing worthwhile doing is ever easy. So, I think it is a given that things like transformation are difficult things to do. By their very nature, they are change-driven, and my experience has been that change is very much driven by the people rather than the technology. I think we've got past the days where the biggest barrier to change was actually implementing the technology. I think that in some ways, ironically, the shoe is possibly on the other foot in the respect that actually the technical change is relatively easy, and it's the social construct change that is the hardest thing to achieve. But for people who don't know, I started out my days in the space industry, and I've worked my way through to IT, and here I am at Datacom. And I think that the driving force of successful change, because there's lots of change that happens and not all of it's successful, is to adopt a viewpoint of the customer, and for internal changes that could be adopting the viewpoint of our internal customer. I think unless you can fundamentally answer the why question of what's in it for your end customer, be it your customer that's paying a bill, or in a CIO case, some of your internal stakeholders, unless you can fundamentally bring to the table something that delivers things that they need, you probably really ought not to be doing the change.
So walking back then from the end product of transformation, what do you think are some of the key steps CIOs must take along the way? Is there a starting point to kick off a transformation journey?
Look, it's a little bit like cake baking. There are recipes, but some recipes are better than others, right? And so I think that, following a methodology is always a key thing to do, but you really do need to overlay that with the context of your own business and I think in many cases your own practical experience or the practical experience of others. And I would absolutely start with whatever framework you're using for transformational change. I would absolutely start with the why. Why do we need the change? Why will this benefit our customers? And then once you've established what the why is, then you can start to move on to, so what does this change instantiate, or what does this change establish in the customer's eyes? What does that do, and what does that mean for stakeholders, be they internal or external stakeholders? Sometimes we do changes just for regulatory and compliance issues, and no one's thankful for those things, but of course they're necessary things to do, right? And then lastly, I think it's really turning your focus to the how. And traditionally, I've seen too many change programs focus too much on the how without really clearly establishing the why and the what. And I think the why and the what, the why is the tree on your horizon. It's your strategic output as to how are you going to eventually get there? And when you get there, how will you know that what you've done is the right thing to do? And so I genuinely believe we really do need to have a good focus on why are we doing this change and what benefit does it bring before we leap into I know how to do this, which is often in an engineering sense what happens.
Absolutely, some great points there. And from your own experience, then, what are some of the challenges? Legacy, budget, culture. What are some of the common roadblocks, do you think, to avoid along the way on a transformation journey?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, and not trying to dodge the question, but it is largely contextual and depends on what kind of change you're doing. But I'd start generically and say that if you have a look at legacy, I think one of the things that people forget is that on a daily basis, we create our own legacy day by day by day. So I think that legacy is almost a construct that exists, and it is what it is today, and it will be what it is tomorrow. And I think about I'm starting to see changes happening in companies that maybe 3 years ago would have considered themselves to be digital natives. And they are now struggling to grapple with the fact that having been in a digital native environment for 3 years, they now have a digitally native legacy that they need to deal with. So I think that legacy is always there, and it's just a question of the depth of that legacy. Budgets are always a constraint. I have a view around budgets that goes something along these lines, that if you don't have a sufficient budget, it's probably because you don't have a good enough story. And I think that a large part of change, particularly business change, but also some technical change, really actually revolves around the story you're able to tell about the change. And to beat on the drum, I get back to it really revolves around the why are you making this change and what are the benefits for the stakeholders. And if you've got that story down pat, my experience in going to boards is that generally speaking, that money is almost always available. Look, there are always constraints. No one has an unlimited budget. But generally speaking, if you've got a good enough story, most people will see the sense and be able to give you the freedom and the resources, be it financial money or people that you need to do stuff, or some technology that you need to do stuff. You can do these things.
Absolutely. Storytelling is so incredibly important these days for CIOs. And so then when it comes to your own role, it's obviously something that you are well versed in. So can you tell us a bit more around, as a CIO, in what ways you collaborate and influence the organization and the leadership team at Datacom?
It's interesting. Prior to me being at Datacom, I was CIO for several other New Zealand companies, and this was now reaching back 10 years. And I would say that the pieces that drove that were definitely more technical in a decade ago. Now, most of the change that we're seeing is around the cultural context. And so it's, and if I just wind, it's even changed in the last 2 years. If I just wind forward to the last 2 years and go, what impact has COVID had on how we do change and what we do change? It's, new ways of working is almost always about how do people feel about it? How do they deal with it? What do we need to change to actually enact some of the processes that are now upon us because of a change in physical location or a change in virtual location. So I think that, the cultural piece is probably the most important piece to get right, is kind of where I get to. And I think that you can effect a perfect change that will still fail if you haven't got the cultural embedding right in the organization.
So do you think then that hybrid work is here to stay? Is that now that?
Oh, look, yeah. So I've talked a little bit about this in other parts of the media. I think we, since the first COVID first reared its head in New Zealand, and I'll talk about the New Zealand context, but I see it in our Australasian operations as well. We had what let's just call it wave one. It's a terrible name because it has a lot of other connotations. But if you have a look at it, there was an immediate emergency to be able to go home and do work from home. And so it's almost like we took the analog of our business processes and we just digitized them. So instead of sitting in an office in a meeting room, everybody leapt onto Teams or Oracle or whatever your particular poison was at that time. And we did a booming business in selling VPNs to people so that they could securely, remotely access their corporate stuff. And that wave one, I think, probably lasted about 6 months before you started to really press against the edges of actually having Teams is great, but it's not actually the answer, because there's a whole bit that's missing that you don't get from social interaction and you don't get from various things. And wave two came along sort of probably late 20, early 21, somewhere around there, where people started to try and codify what new ways of working would look like. And so you saw big articles come out from Gartner and Forrester and Meta and IBM, I know, wrote a huge paper on what does the future of work look like in terms of their stuff. And really what you saw in that second wave was people starting to adopt digital ways of working. So you saw probably the emergence of collaboration products like Miro and Mural and Monday.com. They started to come to the forefront, which was trying to answer the old analog problems in a digital way that was highly collaborative. And I think we've knocked on the edge of that. Even now, you've got to the point where I don't know if you've used Miro or Mural or any of those things, but they definitely have their limitations, right? Yeah. And so people are now seeking different ways of working and different ways of interacting. And one of the things that's become quite relevant, because we've gone through the same process in Datacom. We've done a bunch of research and we've done a bunch of interviews with all of our staff and even some of our customers about how we want to interact and how do they want to interact with us. And what we're finding is that people will come to work to do purposeful work. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a Google are leading the space in terms of some of their thinking around purposeful work. And coming to work to sit on a Teams meeting all day is not purposeful work. It's not value add work. But coming to work to meet your teammates, to have a bit of an innovation session or a strategy session on a whiteboard, that's actually purposeful work, because there are things that there are no analogs for in the digital work. Meeting face to face is a challenge. There's been some discussions even around the utilization of our actual space that we have, and even to simple things like the positioning of video conferencing facilities are always positioned at the short end of the room, and it becomes hard to have a face-to-face conversation when you're looking down a long skinny table and you can barely see the one person at the end who's the speaker, right? So there's a whole bunch of those things that are playing out, but I do think that similar to some changes we had in the 70s and the 80s around the social contract of a job for life, I think we're seeing another shift of the social contract within the work environment in terms of I do wonder if most people will actually ever return to a workplace. I think that there is a question there that really needs answering. I can understand why companies who have a lot of money invested in floor plates would want people to come back to get that return on investment, but I do wonder whether that's actually what people will do. Many staff, our surveys are saying that many staff actually want to return to work, and we would encourage that. I wonder long run how many of them actually will return to work and how many of them have permanently made the move to work from home.
Yeah, indeed. And if I can just ask you to expand a little bit on the people piece, because you've mentioned that a few times. So can you tell us how are you creating that internal culture that does, inspire individual growth and help people feel connected to Datacom?
So I think the emphasis has moved a lot post-COVID from the physics of management to the art of leadership. And so there is for me a big distinct difference, and we can see in among some of our managers and leaders that some are better at it than others. Generally speaking, those who are able to deal with the complexities of a team of people, some of whom are very high on IQ, some of whom are very, very, very high on EQ. And there's no one team that's homogenous. So there's no one solution that fits them all. And really, I think it is actually about sitting down and having meaningful individual conversations about what are people's career aspirations. We are far more equipped and dare I say it, far more willing to, at a leadership level, now have a conversation about not necessarily about how you manage your work-life balance, because I don't think that it's a balance, but how you manage your work-life choices. Because I think that, the typical example I would use is working mums, who have kids who are home sick with COVID. And the reality of it is you actually have to fit that into your day and juggle all of those things. And, there's a lot of talk about should we actually be looking as a society at changing school hours to match work hours so that we can do some, have some extra flexibility around shuffling around that stuff. And it'll probably take, successive governments at least 10 years to get their head around that, and by which time we will have all moved on to something different. But there are some social challenges as well as economic challenges, as well as leadership challenges. And I genuinely believe that it's actually about having the personal, relatable conversations. It's about being authentic. It's about being honest. It's about understanding that things are different. And I have a saying in my team that says that, will the introverts please phone an extrovert because they are not okay. And, the introverts in IT are all very happy staying at home. Like, it's great. But there is a whole section of people in our communities who are not okay. They don't like being at home on a daily basis and never seeing anybody. They thrive. They get their energy off social interaction and the current regime of what's happening, COVID and technology and isolations, and that is actually taking that choice away from those people. So how do you reinstate that in a way that's actually meaningful, and that you don't all come back to the office to sit on a Teams meeting and talk Zoom all day? It's just not overly productive, to be honest.
Yeah. And look, you mentioned there some practical things that could be looked at around, especially for women who have children or parents who are looking to have better working hours. And just expanding that a bit more, can you tell us what you think around why we don't have enough diversity in IT roles in New Zealand? And what are some other practical things that can be done to address that issue?
Well, it's quite a big topic. So diversity in IT, look, I think it's not just, I'd start out by saying I don't think it's just IT. I think it's across the board. I think there is a challenge around diversity. The challenge has been exacerbated in recent years because work has turned to be more of a social construct than a functional construct. So I think that there's a pretty challenging piece of work that's going on in there that we need to get our head around. I also believe that to some extent diversity is an output, not necessarily an input. So I think that the big leadership challenge around diversity and is to understand that as individuals we have biases, and it's well known that managers tend to hire people that are similar to themselves. So there's a bias that you need to be aware of straight away. But there are also social and cultural biases. It is as much as we'd like to hope that it was different, the fact of the matter is that STEM subjects are not presented in an equal way to women as they are to men, right at your early childhood, right the way through to your primary school. So as an input to, is there a diverse workforce coming into the pool of people that companies can choose from? The simple answer is no. And look, I can remember, 15 years ago, there was a conversation about we need to be teaching more STEM subjects and making more STEM subjects more appealing to women, for instance. And of course, so, that's just one aspect of diversity. There's a whole bunch of other aspects of diversity that I think we're in danger if we're not careful of sort of glossing over them. So, the two popular kind of diversity pieces are women in the workforce, and then I can't think of a different word, but sexual diversity in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And my perspective is that they are but two of the different kinds of diversity that you can have. There's racial diversity, there's attitudinal diversity, there's diversity in how people think, that it's independent of whether you're male, female, Chinese, or Afghani. So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff, and we're potentially in danger of sort of codifying it down to one or two things, and I think the problem is actually much more complex than that. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that Datacom is looking at is, and it is a different pathway into IT, is the Take Two program, which is Datacom is involved in. Yep. So can you tell us a bit more about the program and Datacom's involvement in it?
Yeah, so Take Two is a charity run by a very energetic young man called Cameron Smith. And its focus in life is to literally, as the movie says, take two, the second take. It's to give people who've had significant prison sentences an opportunity at a different life, and it really is about a second chance for them. It's modelled off a program in the States called The Last Mile, which has been running for more than a decade now. And essentially, Datacom, along with a number of other sort of large companies within New Zealand, we support this particular initiative, and it fits into our wider initiatives of having brought on, I don't remember the exact number, but it's over the 200 graduates in the last sort of 12 months, and so we are bringing on graduates or interns from all walks of life, from all places, from all age groups, because we understand that in the digital environment, the skills shortage is endemic. And unless we actually stand up and will the leader of this industry please stand up? Unless you actually stand up and are counted and make the changes that you need to make to get to an outcome that is different and we're not kidding ourselves. We know that this outcome is not going to be different tomorrow or next week or even next year. This is a 3, 5, 8, 10-year kind of strategic plan for us in terms of growing the shortage. I was looking at some Australian numbers. There is something like 2 million Australians will require training in the digital economy over the next year alone. That's 10% of the workforce. That's quite a lot, right? And so where do you start with that? And I think that you can talk about it forever, but at some point you actually got to get the pens and pencils out and start doing some stuff. And that's really what our commitment to people like Take Two. We help Take Two with a whole pile of technology things. We do some work with AWS for them, and we do some work inside the prisons where we help them with setting up networking and infrastructure, and there are a bunch of other companies, hardware for laptops and curriculums and all of those sorts of things. So there's a growing community of people who are getting behind actually doing something that is actually going to make a difference.
It's an incredible thing to be part of, Karl, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about how it pans out over the next few years. So yeah. Well done on Datacom's involvement in that. So just to wrap up then, can I ask you what's important to you in the months ahead?
In the months ahead, so there are some things that I think that are background things, and that's part of being a CIO and a CISO. And then I think I have a list of things that are projects that I have to do, and of course, security being the lead out one of them at the moment, and the pace with which the security landscape is changing is just absolutely phenomenal. It is 3, 4, 5, even 10, 15-fold what it used to be, 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So we've got our hands full around trying to keep up and actually get ahead of where we think we might need to be in a quarter's time, or 2 quarters, or 3 quarters. So I'm very much thinking about what do we need to look like in 2025 as opposed to what do I need to do tomorrow. Look, there's some stuff I need to do tomorrow, but really my focus is about what are the building blocks that I need to put in place. I think that the whole aspect of composability is becoming much more critical in the digital world, where you do have composable business functions, and you can just mix and match them as you need to provide the business with the kind of flexibility that they need to react to the things that they need to. And I think that everybody having to go home literally in the matter of a week was kind of one of those things. Had we not had VPNs and remote access and all of those kind of building blocks that you almost take for granted if you're a large company, but certainly if you're a small to medium-sized company, those things don't exist. And so, with that challenge, of course, comes opportunity. How do you create those things for those sorts of companies so that they can turn those things on and off? In the broader sense, outside of the immediate projects that we have to do, I think that CIOs and CISOs have a role to play in the business, and I'm a firm believer in some things like, my role is to listen with a view to understand. And I think we were given 2 ears, 2 eyes, and a mouth, and we should use them in that order. I really do. It's just, we should stop and listen. It's a difficult challenge for technology people, because people often come to the technology groups for expecting an answer. And I think that we sometimes forget we are servants of the business. We're there to serve their needs. And I think that that's a thing that I think about quite a lot, is how do I best serve the needs of my stakeholders? And some of that comes through earning respect around some of the decisions you make, the way you behave, the way you communicate. And a big chunk of my work is about guiding people. It's not about being the authoritative point of an answer for every ill that ever ailed the company, but it is about providing the guardrails and the guidance and those sorts of things. And then I think that the combination of those two of those things is undoubtedly coming to a head in strategy around digitization, hyper-automation, security. Like, all of those things are really coming to a head where we actually have to do some stuff, and we have to do some different stuff than we did maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Absolutely. So some meaty issues to get into in the months and years ahead. Karl Wright, CIO at Datacom, thank you so much for your time today.